Hello, my name is Ebenezer. In the IELTS Academic Writing Tax 1, we will have to understand that the test is a description test. Okay, so the IELTS Writing Tax 1 is a description test. What you should realize is that you'll be given either a line graph, a bar graph, a pie chart, a table, or a multiple graph, and then you are going to be tested on your ability to interpret the information that is presented in those graphs or in those visual charts given to you. And you are going to do this description in your own words. Take note of that, in your own words. And that is what we call paraphrasing. So you're going to make sure that the words that you are speaking it's from your own words, and you're not copying the information from anywhere. Occasionally, you might be given either a map or a process diagram to describe the various stages in the process diagram. Okay, so sometime in the map you might be given two places or several places for you to look at the differences between them, or look at how the various nature of the thing is and try to differentiate. Or you can be given a process diagram where you need to follow the stages and see how they work. And we'll be looking at them separately. We'll be explaining more about them in a different lesson, but in this lesson we'll be concentrating on the first four: line graph, bar graph, pie chart, and table. Okay, and then we'll be concentrating on describing trends. Okay, describing trends. When we talk about trends, we mean the happenings between 2 points in time. Okay, so when we have two different times and then we look at what has happened in between them. Okay, sometimes some of the things, the variable get an increasing trend, sometimes they get a decreasing trend. So we'll be looking at all of those things within this particular lesson. So when it comes to the academic writing tax 1, you must write a minimum of 150 words, and you should spend about 20 minutes on that. Take note of that. So you have to write at least 150 words, and this number of words is not objective. Okay, it's not something that you have to set. It's not your own objective. Okay, it is compulsory for you to get a minimum of 150 words, otherwise you won't be able to get the tax achievement that you want. And this 20 minutes is actually an advice from tutors who actually inform you not to spend more than 20 minutes on the tax 1. One of the most important thing you need in this section is that you need to know specific vocabularies that relate to describing trend. Okay, so we'll be looking at a line graph in this particular lesson. Okay, we're looking at a line graph with examples, and we're using it also to find out the vocabulary. So let's look at a sample question. So this is a line graph. Okay, and line graphs, they are used to show trends or maybe tendencies or happenings that have actually gone on over a period of time. And if you take a line graph or a graph as a whole, it has two parts. It has this vertical side, which is called the y-axis, and if you take this side, it is called the x-axis. So if you take the vertical side with the y-axis, that gives us the information on that vertical horizon, and then out of the x-axis also gave us the horizontal horizon. Okay, so it's very important that you read what is on each one of them and what they actually contain in order to understand every part of the graph. So if we take this graph, there are two things we can learn from each others. Okay, so if you take that of the X, it shows us the period of time, which is from 2008 to 2016. And when you take that of the Y-axis, it also tells us that of the number of books that have been sold. All right, so it shows us the number of books that have been sold. Now, a quick question: how many books were sold in 2010? All right, so if you say that 120 was sold, let me just give a marking. So if you take that of 2010, this one, the number of books sold, it moves here and it just match it to the one which was sold. So if you say it is 120 books sold, you are actually wrong. You are actually wrong. It is not 120. Why? Because the book sold here is in thousands. The book sold is in thousands. And therefore, each number is as a multiple of 1,000. Okay? So 20 here is 20,000, 40,000, 60,000, 80,000, up to 160,000. So the mark here should be 120,000 books which was sold, because the information appears on the Y-axis. The IELTS examiner will check if you actually read and understood the information on both X and Y axis. That's why it's important for you to read and understand it. Now, with line graphs, it's important that you look at the general features or the extensive characteristics of the graph, and not just repeat the number of each time interval. So, for instance, if I ask you something that try to describe this graph, and you say that in 2008, 150,000 books were sold. In 2010, 120,000 books were sold. In 2012, 100,000 books were sold. In 2014. It's boring. Actually, really boring, because you are just repeating what is happening in each time interval, and the examiner is not looking at that. What you do is that you ignore this type of response, as you are not explaining what we call the general trend. The general trend. So what's the general trend that you can see in this particular graph? Simply, we can say that it went down. Okay, so the number of books sold went down. That's up. Okay, so that is the general trend for this one. So how can we say something went down, or what is the other way of saying that something goes in a downward direction? We could use the word decline, decrease, or drop. So how can we describe the general trend of this graph? We can say that the graph shows a decline in the number of grammar books sold. So notice how we used a noun in this example. We called it a decline. So notice how we use a noun in this example, a decline. This information is a little bit incomplete. We need to add some time period to it. Okay, so what is the starting point here? What is the starting point? We can see the starting point is in 2008 and the ending point is in 2016. So let's add the timeline to it. The graph shows a decline in the number of grammar books sold between 2008 and 2016. All right. So now we've added between the time between 2008 and 2016. But do you know that there are several ways you can say this time period? That 2008 and 2016, there are different ways you can also say this time period. We can say it this way. The graph shows a decline in the number of grammar books sold over an 8-year period. The difference between 2008 and 2016 is actually 8 years. Okay, so it is an 8-year period. Notice how we actually placed a dash in between the 8 and the year. Okay, we did not say 8 years period. We used 8-year period because 8-year in itself becomes an adjective, and then adjectives qualifies a noun. Okay, so adjectives are in their singular forms. Okay, adjectives are always in one particular form, so we can say an 8-year period and don't say 8 years period. Okay, for instance, you can say that one red car or two red cars. You can't say two red cars. You can't add an S to the red. We will study more about this one as we go on. Okay, we will study more about it. This is actually called a compound adjective, and we will go into details with example on that. Let's look at the compound adjectives in detail. So when we talk about compound adjectives, is when a hyphen, all right, when a hyphen is used to join two or more words together to make an adjective. So take notice of this hyphen. When a hyphen is put together, all right, it's put between two or more words to make an adjective, and that's what we call a compound adjective. These type of hyphens are not put, they are not used by native speakers. Okay, they are not used by native speakers, but you are expected to use them on the day of your exam because it tells the examiner that you are at a very good level of your English language. So let's look at some examples of compound adjectives that have been used with a period of time. He works a 40-hour week. Okay, so there is no S after the hour. You can say he works a 40 hours week. Okay, so this is for someone who works 40 hours per week. Okay, so he works a 40-hour week. And also, he went to a 3-week vacation. You can say he went to a 3 weeks vacation. Take note of that. It is a 4-month contract, not it is a 4 months contract. So you can see that there is no S after the words there. Okay, so they are in their singular form, and that is how a compound adjective look like. Let's do a little exercise. I want you to change the sentence I'm going to give it to you now, and then include a compound sentence with it. Include a compound adjective. Okay, so your exercise is to change the sentences, these sentences, to include a compound adjective to it. So let's look at an example. He works 8 hours a day. So somebody works 8 hours a day. That's the sentence. So you're going to include a compound adjective by finding a way to change some of these words into it. So he works 8 hours a day can be changed into he works an 8-hour day. He works an 8-hour day. So that 8 hours qualifies how long he works within the day. So he works an 8-hour day, and 8-hour now becomes the compound adjective. So use this one. You can pause the video and try to work on this exercise. All right, let's answer the questions. I believe you got your own answers. So let's look at the answers for the questions. Okay, so each question has its answer here. All right, so the first question has the first answer here. Right, so let's go through. Her daughter is 5 months old. So how do you incorporate a compound adjective or change this one through a compound adjective to qualify the her? We are trying to qualify her. What does she have? She has a 5-month-old daughter. She has a 5-month-old daughter. What does she have? A 5-month-old daughter. And that is here. She has a 5-month-old daughter. You can see that this is having two hyphens in between because the old also is part of the adjectives. The next question, there was a difference of 20 seconds. So we are trying to qualify the difference. How many difference were there? 20 seconds different. A 20-second difference. Sorry, a 20-second difference. So there was a 20-second difference. No S. There was a 20-second difference, and that's what we see in here. Now the third one, the document has 7 pages. What does the document has? It has 7 pages. So it was a 7-page document. It was a 7-page document. It was a 7-page document. The class lasted for 2 hours. It was a 2-hour class. A 2-hour class. I want you to take notes of these compound adjectives and try to put them in your statement or in your practice while you are doing some of your works. Please don't forget them because you need them while you are practicing in the IELTS as well. Now let's go to the line graph again. When we come to the line graph, when you look at this trend, there are two things that you can say to describe this same trend. As we stated, the graph is actually showing a drop in the number of books that have been sold. Okay, so we can state it in a different way. All right, let's look at these two examples or these two ways. We can say that the number of books sold has dropped. All right, which shows a verb. Dropped is a verb. The word dropped is a verb. It's the past tense of the word drop. So it shows a verb. Or we can say that the graph shows a drop in the number of books sold. So a drop is now a noun. Okay, so drop is a verb. A drop is a noun. But let's ask ourselves a question. How much of a drop was it? Was it a large drop or a small drop? Okay, so every kind of drop can be a drop, but how much of a drop was it? That is why with our description, we don't know what we need to add. Okay, we don't know. So what we need to do is to add an additional information. Okay, so that is why it's important for you to have what we call qualifiers. For you to have what we call qualifiers. So if we take this particular sample question, we can look at two words to describe the trend. If we take two different qualifiers, we can use them to describe the same trend to know how much drop, all right, the number of books sold was. So let's look at this. The first one is considerable and the second one is considerably. Considerable and the second one is considerably. What I need you to do now is that I want you to match these two qualifiers into this particular statement. So I want you to put them in the statement. Choose them and look at the right one that you think you want to put it. So maybe you want to put 1 to the first question and then put 2 to this one, or you want to change it. So it depends on you. That's what I want you to do now. So do it for me. So where does each one go? The number of books sold has dropped considerably. The graph shows a considerable drop in the number of books sold. So why did we put considerably in the first sentence and considerable in the second one? Why did we put them in that position in each sentence? Now let's look at the first sentence alone. As you can see, the word considerably was placed after the verb. Okay, so the word considerably was placed after the verb. Why? Because this considerably qualifies or describes how or what is happening to the verbs. It describes the quality of the verb drop. So the word order normally becomes verb plus adverb. All right, verb plus an adverb. So we can say it dropped considerably. So drop is now a verb, and also considerably is the adverb. So dropped is the past tense of the word drop. So that is how the word order becomes. Let's look at some examples. We can say that she walked, all right, she walked slowly. So which one is the verb and which one is the adverb? Walk is the verb and slowly is the adverb. Let's look at the second one. He ate quickly. He ate quickly. So which one is the verb and which one is the adverb? Yes, ate is the verb. That is the past tense of eat. And then quickly is the adverb. So ate is the verb and quickly is the adverb. You can notice how adverbs always comes after a verb, and also know how considerably is an adverb. Most of the adverbs end with ly. You can see ly as the last two letters. So if we take drop, how did it drop? We can say considerably. How did she walk? We can say slowly. How did she eat? We can say quickly. Okay, so it shows how, it describes how something happens to a particular verb. So adverbs actually shows how something happens to a particular verb. How about the next sentence? The graph shows a considerable drop in the number of books sold. The graph shows a considerable drop in the number of books sold. So for us to describe how the number of books sold drop, we have to use the word considerable. But just look at it carefully. You can see that this time the considerable actually comes before the word drop. This is because this considerable is an adjective. Okay, so the considerable is an adjective, and adjectives qualify things. Okay, so it qualifies or it describes things. It describes things, and therefore it comes before a noun. It comes before nouns. All right, comes before nouns. So if you check the word order, it now becomes adjective plus a noun. Adjective plus a noun. Adjective plus a noun. Okay, so some of the examples of adjective plus a noun, we can say a considerable drop. Let's look at this one first. Let's see the first one. Considerable drop, slow decline, sharp increase. So the word considerable, slow, and sharp all describe the trend. So drop is a trend, decline is a trend, increase is a trend. Okay, so that word considerable, slow, and sharp, now it describes the quality or how far it rose or it declined. Now let's look at these two sentences again. The number of books sold has dropped considerably. The graph shows a considerable drop in the number of books sold. What have we learned here? We have learned that these words, which is the adjectives and also the adverbs, will give us a more accurate description of the trend. So we just don't say that the number of books dropped. Yes, it did, but how far did it drop? Okay, so that is how you should consider these qualifiers as very important. One thing you should notice that when you are writing the lesson or you are writing your IELTS essays, you need to imagine that the examiner is not looking at the graph at all, or the examiner is not actually seeing the graph. So how can you describe this graph into detail so that the examiner can picture the graph from what you are looking at? And that is why it's very, very important to give an accurate description. Let's look at an example. Now, let's look at this. If you look at this particular graph, this is about the price of chocolate. Okay, so if you consider this one, you can see that there was a rise in the amount of chocolate, and also this one also there was a rise in the price of chocolate as well. So if I say that the price of chocolate rose, how do you imagine the graph to be? Just for instance, take it that you don't have any graph before you. How would you imagine the graph? Is it this one or is this one? Okay, so is this the first one or the second one? You can see that the graph A rose, but there is a difference between the rate at which the graph A rose as compared to how the graph B actually rose. There is a difference, a very, very huge difference. So if you say that the price rose without giving any accurate rate at which it rose, then you are not doing any good to yourself. So instead of saying that the graph rose for graph A, we can say that the rise was slight. So we can say that it rose slightly, right? For graph A, we can say it rose slightly. For graph A, we can say it rose slightly, right? But in graph B, we can say it rose sharply, sharply. So both of them are different. This rise and that rise, they are not the same. That's why it's very important for you to give a more complete and more accurate description of the graph. So we can say that in graph A, we can see that the price of chocolate rose slightly, but in the graph B, we can say the price of the chocolate rose sharply. So let's write that down. Now that we've been able to get these important reason for describing an accurate trend, I think it's now time for us to learn more vocabularies to describe trend.